Hi, our topic this month is sharpening difficult to sharpen blades. So here's what I'm going to go over. Small router plane, large would be the same. Shoulder plane blades. The squirrel tail really sits low. The scrub plane that has a curved blade. The very narrow 1/8" blade. Chisel, sorry. The spoke shave blade, which is very low angle, so you can't raise it up too high or else you get above your effective angle. And the skew block plane blade, which is angled on a skew. So let's start over here with the easy one. This is treated just like a chisel in that there's no ruler trick used. So the first thing you're going to do is go in and you're going to flatten and polish the bottom of the blade. Like I said, just as you would a chisel. Now, I've got to pretend here for a minute because I don't want to start over. This is my coarse stone, this is my fine stone. So imagine, if you will, this was brand new. I would go in starting on the coarse stone and I would, you want to be careful because it has a tendency to vibrate, but just move that forth and back, gradually migrating from one side of the stone to the other so you're not wearing a spot in the stone. And you'd go through until you had a consistent level of scratches over that entire surface. And it's normally going to turn it into a light gray. And then you would need to move up to another in-between stone. So I would go maybe to a 6,000 or an 8,000. And then do the same thing, only this time what you're trying to do is remove the 1,000 grit scratches. And you'd work that through until there are no visible 1,000 grit scratches left on the back. And then finally you would come to your finishing stone. Now my finishing stone is a Sharpen 16,000. I just don't think you can top it. And you're going to go through carefully. You don't want to not have that laying nice and flat. So go slow, light to moderate pressure, and work that through until there are no longer any scratches. It should come up to a mirror polish. Now, to sharpen the actual cutting edge, what you're going to need to do, and you can use your diamond stone as well. In fact, I'll use that. Hold it right over here in the edge. Actually, I'll put it up on here. It makes it a little bit easier to see. Lubricate it. And you have to have it you have to be on the edge because you've got to lay this below the stone. So you can find your primary bevel. It's quite easy. It's a fairly large bevel. And then you're going to pick it up just a little bit. So if that's 25 degrees, I'm going to come up to about 25, 26, 27, maybe 28, 9 degrees. And then little short strokes. Don't try to move too far. That way it's easy to maintain your angle. If you're walking it back and forth, you're going to end up making a mess of it. So there's your primary. Come up off your primary, hold that angle, and just little short strokes. And you can move side to side. That's the nice thing about a diamond stone. You're not going to wear it out. And do that until you can detect a slight burr on the back side of the blade. Once you get there, then you're going to go to your fine stone. And you can go right from 1,000 to, in this case, my 16. Now, what we just did is we created something we call a secondary bevel. We didn't polish the big primary bevel. We elevated and polished, you can see it, a little secondary bevel out there on the end. What you're going to do on the fine stone is, instead of coming up 3 or 4 degrees, you're going to come up a few more. And same idea, little short strokes. Now this stone will wear, so I'm moving it slightly side to side as I'm doing this. It only takes about 10 seconds. Because you're actually creating a third or tertiary bevel right out at the edge. And then you're going to set that on your stone. Actually, I do it the way I did it. And then you're just removing the burr. So a couple of seconds is all it takes. Now, this is not a blade that gets used a ton, just because the amount of surface area that it actually works is quite limited. So you're not going to have to do this very often. But once that's polished up, put that back in your plane and you're ready to go. Okay, shoulder plane. What's so difficult about that? Well, you have very little lateral movement. I'm going to take the lever cap off and I'll show you what I mean. So that's all I have for lateral adjustment. Well, that probably doesn't amount to a degree in either direction, which means in order to keep that blade so that you can get it parallel to the sole when you bring it out, you can't deviate from square. That's assuming that square is what you want. And by that I mean, if you sharpen this and check it with a square, and it is indeed square, but when you put it in here, you can't get it to project evenly, then what you're going to need to do is go in and you're going to have to mate it to your plane. And maybe that surface is not perfectly square to this. It doesn't mean the plane won't work. It just means you're going to have to go in and you're going to have to match that with your blade. Once you've done that, this is another plane that doesn't need to be sharpened very often because it doesn't get a ton of use. And what I mean is, it's not a plane that you're going to use to surface a large board. You're going in to address a shoulder, maybe the bottom of a dado. So in a project, I can't see that being used a ton. All right, this one I do the same way I would do any bench plane. Start off on a brand new blade, you're going to have to go in and create a little back bevel. So instead of having to polish all the back, put a little steel rule. This is the Charlesworth ruler trick. Put a little steel rule. Doesn't matter how thick it is, just use the same one all the time. Keep it in the same spot, in this case flush with on my right side of the stone. Starting with your coarse stone, you're going to go in, set that blade down, stay within 1/4 of an inch of the opposite edge, 2 hands there to hold onto it, and just move that forward and back on your coarse stone. Even though this is my fine, we're pretending. You're going to go in there and you're going to work it until you get a little polished bevel that runs side to side. And then it's small enough, I think you can jump right up to your 16,000 if you want. You can do a middle step. And you're going to go in there and you're going to move that side to side, staying within 1/4 of an inch of the edge. Do that until when you flip it over, you've got a nice, clean, polished strip. Now, once you've done that, you never really have to touch the back again other than a quick 3 seconds to remove any burr. So when it comes to sharpening, you don't want to throw it off once you've mated that to your plane body. So you're going to come in here on your coarse stone, whether it be the diamond, or in this case a Sharpen 500. Set that on the primary bevel. I can only use one finger on there. Find the primary bevel, come up a little bit off of that, maybe 2 or 3 degrees. And rather than do circles like this, because if you do, you're most likely to skew the plane. You're going to push more on one side than the other. So what I do on this one is just little wee short strokes. Now, when I hold on to it, I'm squeezing my 2 hands together so that they work as one. My wrist and my elbows are locked. Everything comes from my shoulder. Find your primary, come up, move that forward and back, little short strokes. Concentrate on putting the pressure right in the middle of the blade so that you're not skewing it one side or the other. Do that for about 10 seconds, slowly migrating left to right. As soon as you can detect a slight burr on the back side, you've created a new secondary bevel. Then you're going to move over here to your finishing stone. Again, I'm using a 16,000 Sharpen. Do the exact same setup. Find your primary, but instead of pulling it up 3 degrees, pull it up 5 degrees, creating a tertiary bevel. Little wee short stroke. If you're doing it right, you'll see a shadow on the stone that's the full width of the blade, which is what you're seeing right there. After about 5 to 7 seconds of that, you're going to put your ruler on, using the opposite side of the stone, just a couple of seconds to remove any burr that might be there. Make sure it's nice and dry before you put it back in so you don't end up with rust. And set that in place. Careful when you put it in. Remember, these are bevel up. Put your lever cap on. Okay, now this is my little squirrel tail. And I really like this. I use it a ton. This is the way I use it. This squirrel's tail, you can see that, goes up into your palm. I put my pinky up underneath there to hold it. I have 2 fingers on either side, thumb and middle finger. A little spot right there for your index finger, so you have lots of control. Great plane, wonderful for cutting chamfers, getting into tight places. Oftentimes, if I've got to go in, I've got to do the edge of a drawer, the inside edge of a drawer. I can get in really close, go down like this, go over, turn, and come up the other side. And then I've just got to 3/8 of an inch to do with the chisel. But it's a hard blade to hold on to. There's just no material there. So here's where I use, you can actually make a little device. I think David Charlesworth shows you how to do that, but I just take a pair of vice grips. It's got to be a little tighter than that, just so I have more to hold on to. And we're going to sharpen this the same way we would any block plane. I'll use my 1000 grit trend. And I'm going to turn this one around so I'm working on a different side. So set that on the primary. Raise it up. Again, the small blades, much easier if you just do little short forward and back strokes instead of introducing circles. Circles, you have a tendency on the narrow blade to skew it. And all the vice grips are doing is just giving me something to hold on to. As soon as you get a burr, come over to your 16,000, find your primary, come up a little bit higher. And probably about 1 inch strokes. I'm up a little higher, I'm creating that tertiary bevel. Now at that point I've got to let go of the blade. Now I can't go all the way over because this is shorter than the stone is wide. So what I'll do is just put the end on the ruler and then just a little short stroke like that. Now, like every other blade that I do with a back bevel, you've got to go in and create it first when it's new. And that's a process of walking through your coarse stone up to your fine. Once you've polished it, you never touch the back with anything but your final stone. And this is a real difficult plane to set because it's so low down there, it's hard to get at. So put the lever cap on. And what I try to do, I've got a little, I like this little brass, 4-ounce brass hammer. And without it being too tight, I go in there and just give it a little bit of a tap left or right and go in there and test it so that you're getting equal cut on both sides. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll purposely set this on a bit of an angle. So I've got a very light cut on one side and a coarse cut on the other. So if you're in there cutting a chamfer and the grain's messing with you, you can go in, you can get your cut down to where you want it, but now it's still tearing, and then go over to the other corner where it's a much lighter cut. And oftentimes a lighter pass will reduce that tearing. Okay, scrub plane. Not a terribly popular plane, but if you have one or if you like to process wood right from scratch or rough, this is a big, fast, helpful way of doing it. I only use one stone on this, and it's going to be, and I prefer my diamond stone for this in particular because you'll see how I do it, particularly when you're first starting this. You have a tendency to dig the corners in. So the back on this one has to be prepared like a chisel. There is no back bevel. There is no ruler trick used on this. And you can tell that I haven't done much to this. And the reason is this is a lot like an axe. You're going to go in and you're going to hog out material, but you're always going to be following up with a finer plane, joiner, smoother. So no surface left from this plane is going to remain. So I don't worry about it being precise like I do other blades. So you've got a 25-degree primary bevel, and the radius, there's nothing sacred about that. Set that on the, again, I hold it, I always want to get as many fingers as possible on the cutting edge. I'm holding onto the blade like this. I'm right-handed. Get my fingers in here. Squeeze this thumb so that I'm keeping both hands tied together. Find your primary bevel. Now I'm going to lean it forward, but I'm going to start on my right corner. So there's my primary. I'm up from it. I'm on the right corner. I'm going to start doing little circles. Now, while I'm doing little circles, I'm also going to roll like this. So I start here in the far corner, little circles, and slowly roll. I'm in the middle now. Keep going. Almost to the other side. Keep rolling. Now I'm at the other side, and I'm going to come back. And it usually doesn't take any more than that. Now, it's this corner work that has a tendency to dig in accidentally. Once you get a burr on the back side, you're done. Flip it over, lay it down flat. Just a couple of passes to remove any burr that's on there. And that's all it is. all there is. It's a very simple blade once you've seen it done. Try it a few times. Now this one goes in there bevel down. This one is bevel up. This one is bevel up. This one is bevel up. This one is bevel on the bottom side. So you're sitting in like that. So the angle that you down here means nothing to the performance of the plane, with the exception, if you were to grind that too acute, you'd have no metal there. It wouldn't last. If you exceed the angle of attack, so if that blade is parked in the plane at 45 degrees, if you ever exceed 45 degrees underneath, whether it's your secondary bevel or your primary bevel, the plane won't work because the heel will touch instead of the toe, won't dig in. And oftentimes when folks are first learning to sharpen freehand, that's what they end up doing. So if you're sharpened, it feels sharp, but it won't perform in the plane, or it digs in at the beginning, but then you lose your shaving, go and check that. And I may as well show you right now a good way to do it. Get yourself a something that has a 45-degree slope on it. My PEC combination square that has that. Take your blade that's in question, put it on a piece of wood edge, and hold it at 45 degrees. And as you move it, if it doesn't bite in, then obviously you've exceeded 45 degrees underneath there somewhere, and that's your problem. Now you may have to go back and regrind, and usually that is the case. Okay, next one is a spoke shave. Now that's sitting fairly low, but this is going to be done much the same as any other blade is. I feather the edges, but I've got to be able to get a hold of it. So I'm going to put a vice grips on there, and if you're worried about scratching it, figure out something. Maybe put some tape on it. I don't worry about it. Set that on there. Find your primary. Come up. I'm squeezing, holding both hands together. Now, this is a wider blade, so you can see I'm doing the circles, but I've got as many fingers as possible on that cutting edge to help distribute the pressure uniformly. As soon as you can detect a burr, come over to your finishing stone and do the same thing, except come up a little higher than you were in the previous. About 10 seconds of work. And at the end of 10 seconds, put downward pressure on one corner for 3 seconds, and then switch to the opposite corner for 3 seconds. And that's just a matter of maintaining everything, except I pushed a little hard with this finger, and then I pushed a little harder with my pinky. Final step, another situation where did I drop my steel rule? There it is. Another situation where the blade, or the stone is wider than the blade. So all I'm going to do is just park the end of the blade on the rule. And of course, if this is brand new, you've got to go through and establish that primary bevel before you can work it. Never touch, I'm sorry, I didn't mean primary bevel, I meant to say back bevel. Never touch your back bevel once you've established it with anything but your final stone. This too is a bevel down, so you got to be careful not to exceed the bedding angle in order to keep your plane working. Okay, I'm going to come saving this one for last. Now we'll do our skew block plane. And everybody has a big mystery. It really isn't easy. Now, I want this blade, like I do my block planes, to be straight corner to corner, no feathering of the corners. So I'm going to start off, again, holding it like so, bringing this hand in so I've got as many fingers as I can on the cutting edge, always squeezing my thumb so the two hands operate together. Find your primary, raise up a few degrees. Concentrate on keeping the pressure uniform across the cutting edge. And I'm moving a little bit forward and back, so trying to spread it out. It's a fairly wide blade, so I can do circles. Once you can detect a burr, now it's time to come in here and flatten this. I'm using a Sharpen lapping plate, which is a real luxury, but it's also the flattest reference plate that you're going to find. Okay, I just want to wipe off any dirt on there. Same process, or same procedure. Find your primary. Come up a few degrees higher than you did on the previous stone. About 10 seconds worth of work, creating that tertiary bevel. Then here's the only part that's different. When you put your ruler trick on there, you're going to lay the blade down so that the cutting edge is parallel to the opposite side. Whereas normal blade is like that. In this case, you lay it like that. And then working within 1/4 of an inch of the opposite edge, you go in and you polish off the burr. And of course, you establish the original back bevel the same way, starting out with a coarse stone, getting it so that your back bevel goes corner to corner, and make sure, and sometimes it pays to use a loop. Where did my loop go, Jake? Do you know? Shoot. Or something so that you can get in there and see and make sure there are no grinding scratches, factory grinding scratches that go all the way to the edge. Now this one is bevel up, and it's a little bit of a pain to set up because there's no support. And by the way, there's a slot in here that has to fit on the adjuster knob. There's no support for the blade on the right side. Put that on there. Snug it up, not too tight. Now the way I prefer to use mine is I like to keep the blade sticking out beyond the edge of the plane. So when I'm using this, I only have to concentrate on the point of the blade. And then it's usually easier to either remove or move the fence over all the way over. Advance the blade until when you sight down the sole, the projection appears to be uniform. Want a little bit hanging over. Snug that up, not too tight, and you're good to go. I rarely change this, so I set it for what I want and then leave it. Okay, last one is our 1/8 inch chisel. And the reason why it's so difficult for people to sharpen is because it's so narrow. You have such small reference surface. Starting on your coarse stone, this is probably another area where it would be wise to use your diamond stone, because folks, when they first learn, have a tendency to dig that tip in. Find your primary. Now, I only have room for one finger, but I'm always tying my two hands together. Find your primary, elevate slightly, little wee short strokes. So easy to skew this. Almost don't even want to move laterally. As soon as you can detect the burr, come over to your fine stone, a little bit higher, little wee short strokes. And then no ruler trick on chisels. Lay that flat. Just polish off the burr, and away you go. By the way, that's our shop-made 1/8 inch IBC chisels that are now available. Or if they're not, they will be very soon. There you go. Okay. Now, just to contrast that, I'm going to give you a real quick lesson on sharpening a regular blade, and you can kind of see how we just modify the way we do this to the individual blade. I'll use my 500 or 1000. Jake happens to like the 500. Hold the blade same way every time. The way I do it is index finger up here, fingers tucked into the slot. Index finger of my left hand goes in here, pinky, ring finger, middle finger, and I move this one over. So I have 4 fingers distributing the pressure uniformly across the edge, right at the edge. I squeeze my right index finger, my right thumb between my left thumb and my left index finger so that the two hands are tied together. Set that down. Nice thing about a thick blade like this IBC is it gives you a very wide primary bevel, so it's easy to locate. Find that. Lock your wrist, lock your elbow, elevate 3 or 4 degrees, and then just do tight little circles. If you're going way out like this, you're rocking like this. You want to try to prevent that by having relatively tight circles. And instead of moving my arms out here, I just rock with my feet, heel and toe, and go out like this so it doesn't change the angle that I'm meeting the stone. Up 3 or 4 degrees. And you don't have to go fast, and I mean that in terms of forward and back. Little tight circles. My blade's always on an angle like this to the stone. If you do it like that, the blade is almost as wide as the stone. You're going to be off the stone a fair bit. Hold it on an angle like this, and that will keep your blade on the stone all the time. Usually it only takes about 10 seconds to detect a slight burr on the back side of the blade. You always want to make sure that it goes corner to corner. Then you come over to your 16,000. And you're going to do the exact same thing, except you're going to come up a couple of degrees higher than the previous one. So if my primary is 25, I create a secondary over here on my first stone at, let's say, 29-ish. When I come over here to my finishing stone, I'm doing a third or tertiary bevel, and that wants to be up in the neighborhood of 30, 31, just as long as it's higher than that one. Come up. About 10 seconds of work. Light to moderate pressure. Don't go crazy. At the end of that 10 seconds, without changing anything, you simply push a little harder, in this case on my right index finger for 3 seconds. Then I push a little harder with my left pinky for 3 seconds. And what that does, creates a slight feathering of the outside corners that allows you to make multiple passes on a wide board without feeling lap marks, or what we call plane tracks. And the finish step is to take your steel rule, always on the same side. Now we sell these because they don't have any markings on them, so it's just nice and smooth. Set that on there. Sometimes wise, because you have a burr there, to put it on the outside, then pull it on, and that folds the burr up underneath. 3 fingers to distribute the pressure. Now I do this a lot. I grab that corner with my thumb. I grab that corner with my middle finger. I actually tuck my pinky on the side, and the reason I do that is so that when I'm moving it forward and back, I'm not fishtailing all over, and I'm staying within that 1/4 of an inch spot on the opposite side of the stone. It only takes 3 seconds. Once you've established that primary bevel, it's just the deburring process, which a lot of times the burr actually falls off when you do your tertiary bevel. But to make sure, I always spend 3 seconds on there. That's it. Nothing like a sharp blade. I will give you a bit of advice. Spend your money on your stones. It'll make all of these tools work even better. Hope you enjoyed this. See you.